evening. Welcome back to another great episode of the All Ball, No Foul podcast. What's going on, Nick? How you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. I'm very excited for this episode. I know we haven't recorded in a little bit,
hmm
but I'm doing good overall, man. The Bears won on Sunday. I know it's a different sport, but it's always good going into the week with a Bears W. So feel good, man. How are you feeling, man?
Hey, man, I just wish my fantasy teams could do a little bit better. I went 2-2 this weekend in fantasy. Not looking great in my one league. If anybody's watching that's in that league, bro, this is like the only league I suck in. I'm 0-4. I don't know
Ooh,
why. Yeah,
rough.
it's rough. But like you said, man, the only thing that's keeping me up right now is that the Bears won.
Yep.
Caleb's getting better every week. We just need to give him some time
Yep.
and trust the process.
No, absolutely. If it makes you feel any better, I am 2-2 in three leagues, and I'm 1-3 in another. And
Okay.
I'm decimated with injuries right now in that league. No Devontae Adams, no Cooper Kupp.
Ooh,
It, it,
yeah.
it, it- yeah, it's been a struggle for me for sure in that league.
I hear you on the injuries, man. The league I'm 0-4 and I'm missing Puka. First game of the year, bro. I had him and Amron as my two wide receivers, bro. I thought it was going to be nasty. We're going to finally make the playoffs in that league. Good thing is I'm 4-0 in another league, 3-1 in another one, and then 2-2.
Solid.
So let
Yeah,
me let me just preface that
solid, man.
too. Like I'm doing okay, but
Yeah,
that one league, bro, is just it's bringing me down a little bit.
yeah.
But Nick, what are we going to talk about today on this episode? Because there's been a lot that's happened since the last time we talked.
Yeah, so definitely we're going to talk about the blockbuster trade that just went down with Karl-Anthony Towns going to the New York Knicks, and then obviously Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo,
Mhm.
goes to Minnesota. And obviously, we're Bulls fans, obviously. We're, from Chicago. We have to talk about the Derrick Rose retirement, man,
Of
because of
course,
what he
man.
meant to the city of Chicago. So
Yep.
those are the two topics that we're going to be talking about today. I can't wait to dive deep into it.
And before we begin, guys, as always, please like, comment, and subscribe to the podcast, whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it on Spotify. We appreciate the support and the continued audience that we've been getting, definitely on the Spotify, and we have grown a lot in terms of that platform. So continue to spread the word, guys. We always appreciate anything that you guys give us in terms of feedback or things that we could be talking about. So, Nick, I'm going to let you go first on the Derrick Rose retirement. What were your initial thoughts? How do you feel about this? And do you feel like the Bulls should have somehow made him a Bull for one day? I know I read the reports that that's kind of impossible, but they should have still tried to make it happen.
No, I agree. They should have done everything in their power to make it happen because of what he meant to the city. Obviously he's homegrown from Chicago, went to Simeon High School, you know, and to be a number one pick, to go to the Bulls. That was the year where the Bulls only had like a 2% chance to get the number one overall pick, and they end up getting the number one overall pick. They end up obviously taking Derrick Rose, youngest MVP in NBA history. He unfortunately was just decimated with injuries, man. Especially the first injury, the torn ACL. After the year going to the Eastern Conference Finals, I really felt like that was the year where the Bulls could have at least made the NBA Finals. I felt like they had a better team going into that year. And it's crazy because I think they won 60 some games that year. And Rose and Noah were both injured during the season as well. Rose missed some games during that season. Joakim Noah missed multiple weeks, and the Bulls were still able to find, wins and stuff. But man, Derrick Rose was just sensational. Like in his prime, like you hear all these current players and all these former players talking about it. Like they talk about all these great point guards in today's game, right? Like Steph, like Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, all these guys in the last like decade or so.
Mhm.
Nobody was touching prime Derrick Rose. And you know what's crazy? Like he was the youngest MVP in NBA history. Was
Mhm.
he really in his prime? Like that's how good he was. You're 22 years old winning an MVP. Is that considered you being in your prime?
I don't think it is, but that's also just because he was so young and he was that good already. We only see that with a handful of players a lot of times, especially
Yeah.
because he came out of a freshman year out of Memphis into the NBA. But I'll let continue to cook though, Nick. Continue to
Oh,
cook.
yeah, absolutely. And look at his first season, his rookie season. They're the 8th seed. They're going against the Boston Celtics. First playoff game goes for 36 and 11.
Mm.
I mean, you even see like Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, all these guys, right? that brother was a problem. You know what I'm saying? Like it was just he was so athletic. We've never seen a point guard this athletic before. The guy could jump out of the gym. His finishes around the basket, the way he was able to like, jump in the air, stay in the air for so long, finish through contact. And obviously, in the beginning of his career, he didn't really have a perimeter game. Like, yeah, he had a mid-range game, but he didn't really have a three-point game. But once he started to work on that three ball, man, he was just unstoppable. He really took off. That MVP year was absolutely sensational, man. It was like he was on ESPN every single day. Some crazy highlight happened. You know what I'm saying? Like even players in today's NBA still are still talking about like MVP Rose was one of the most historic MVP seasons we have ever seen from a player. I think he averaged like 25 and like a little bit over 7.5 assists per game that season. Especially that wasn't even like a 3-point era. And as he grew later into his career, while dealing with all these injuries, like when he went to the Knicks, when he went to Minnesota, I think there was a year or two, he shot like 40% from three. So he was capable of knocking down threes. He just didn't have that in his game in the beginning of the year. He had to work on that. But man, could you imagine with that three ball that he was able to develop later in his career after having all these injuries? If he never got injured, man, if he never got injured, there's a lot of what ifs in it. I mean, he's part of like, the Grant Hills, the Penny Hardaways, the Brent Roy's. Like, what if those guys never got hurt? Derrick Rose to me is the biggest what if.
No, I agree, man. It just pains me a lot. I think as Bulls fans, seeing that game in the 2012 playoffs after the NBA lockout season, we went 50 and 16.
Yep.
Were prohibited favorites to make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals, play the Miami Heat again. A lot of people argue that Bulls team could have beat LeBron's team coming off that finals loss to the Mavs the year prior. I personally don't know if that would have happened. I think that the best year the Bulls had a chance to beat LeBron was the year they were up 2-1 when they had Paul Gasol in the 2015 season. I don't think there was another time where they would have been as close. I think that the problem would have been, even with Rose as good as he was, I just think that at that time, Wade was still at that level that he would have been good enough to still be that number two. And I think because the Bulls didn't have a number two at that time, it would have been hard because that was the thing that they did in the East Conference Finals the year prior was make somebody other than Derrick Rose beat them. And there was nobody on that team that was able to put up those type of numbers. You didn't have a Jimmy Butler yet on that team. And obviously Jimmy Butler in his time with Derrick Rose was never at that level of what we've seen him now at the second part of his career. So I don't want to get too far into that. But like you said, though, Nick, Derrick Rose was special. Hometown kid, drafted first overall back in the 2008 draft. Funny thing is that the Miami Heat actually tried to trade for him, trading away Dwayne Wade to get the draft rights to Derrick Rose. Like you said, 2009 playoffs. His welcome to the league moment.
Yep.
He goes off in game one. He already showed that he was going to be special in this league. Won Rookie of the Year that year. Just continued to ascend. 2011 was the MVP year, and that was one of his best, actually probably his best statistical season that he ever had. 25 points a game, 7.7 assists, shot 44% from the field, and then 33% from three. And at the time, like you said, it wasn't a three-point era yet. That was before Steph really came onto the scene and really changed that. But when you're the youngest player to win the award at 22, you lead the Bulls to a 62-20 record. You really instill back that Chicago Bulls 90 feel where it's like, hey, we're really good and we can make the NBA Finals. When they went up 1-0 against the Heat, people were like, damn, we really might make the finals. Fortunately, we didn't, but that was the type of thing that Derrick Rose gave. I think one of the biggest disservices that we have done as Chicago Bulls fans, I think, is revisionist. We forget that we really did hound this guy when he got hurt again in 2013, 2014. And I believe he just didn't want to come back yet. He played 10 games that year. And I remember a lot of people were like, is he giving up? Does he not want to play? People are accusing like his family's making him sit out, so he could get paid. And that was a whole issue in itself. And I just remember because he had just signed that extension right prior to the whole injury skew. So that
Yeah.
was another thing too that I remember in all the time that I watched Derrick Rose in Chicago. But Nick, I'm just going to give one little story right here.
Yeah.
2015 NBA playoffs. You know what game I'm talking about. Game 3 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. Derrick Rose hits that three. Uh,
Thanks.
yep,
LeBron
buzzer
and
beater. So I had rolled my ankle that day playing basketball. And I was watching the game at home afterwards, had ice on it and stuff, and my parents are downstairs. And I just remember as soon as that ball went in, I screamed, I'm like, yo! And I just remember my parents running upstairs, like, are you okay? We thought you broke your ankle. Cause like they thought like I got up and like my ankle had broken. I was like, no, Derrick Rose just won us that game.
yeah.
And I just remember like that was one of the best memories I could think about with Derrick Rose and that shot. And I really thought that the Bulls were going to win that series after he did that because it was the first time that they had won after game one against LeBron. They had actually won a second game.
Yeah.
So that was when I was like, okay, we might actually do this.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too, Nick, before I let you have the mic back,
Yeah.
is his comeback year with Minnesota. Like you were talking about the 3-point shot, he definitely improved it. One of his best shooting seasons was in Minnesota. He shot 37% from three. That 2018-2019 season, he actually averaged 18 points that year, 48% from the field. And that was also the season that he had that 50-point game against the Jazz. And I just remember a lot of people had written off Derrick Rose at that point. Nobody thought he was going to be the guy that he once was before. And he never was after that. But I think that year, it really just kind of solidified how good of a player he was, no matter how many setbacks he had. I will always respect that game in terms of what he was able to do. And I know that that was so emotional for him. And I'm glad that he got to do it with Tibbs as his coach still. So I would have, like that's like the most emotional part is like he always was able to find a way to come back.
Yeah.
And I think for the rest of his career, being a good role player and having some good seasons, especially when he got to the Knicks the second time, it was really good to see like what he had become. So I'm, you know, much respect, a Hall of Famer for sure. I know he never made the finals, but everything he was able to do prior to the injuries and then even what he was able to do after, I think he still has an argument to be a Hall of Famer just based on what he did in his first 3 years in the league. What do you think?
No, absolutely, absolutely true. I know the Bulls would definitely are going to retire his number. I don't think
Oh
there's
yeah.
no questions about that. I think, just like you said, after like the Jordan era, those '90s, Derrick Rose has been the best thing since. The D Rose era has been the best thing since. Obviously, I remember how clutch of a player he was,
Hmm.
and like in his best years in Chicago, all those game winners that he had in his career. Just like you said, the bank shot against Cleveland to go up 2-1. You had he had the double crossover on Jennings against the Milwaukee Bucks
Hmm.
game. There's so many big shots that he did hit in his career in Chicago. Even the first game of the regular season, I forgot which year it was, where he actually had a bad game. He shot like 6 of 23 from the field. It was the game-winning floater against New York. It
Oh
was on
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know
Halloween. I
which
think
one you're
it
talking
was
about.
on
Yeah.
Halloween. I do remember that
Mhm.
as well. Just Derrick Rose was just a killer, man. Like even if he was having a bag, he just wasn't afraid to keep attacking. I think that's
Yeah.
why us Bulls fans, like loved him so much. Like he didn't let anything really like affect him at all. He just kept going and stuff. Um, Derrick Rose is the greatest point guard in Bulls history. We can't even argue that.
There is no argument when it comes to that. He definitely is the best point guard that the Bulls ever had. The sad part too, Nick, is he was so explosive, and I think they said that it was just the way he would jump and land. Eventually, his knees were just going to give out, and I mean, you remember the Goran Dragic dunk that he had. I want to go higher. He was a freak athlete, man. That is one thing. His floater game was insane. I think I think too, just to rehash what we said about the 3-point shot, he really had to start learning how to shoot the three better as his career went on. He kind of became more of a jump shooter than being able to drive into the hole because he just didn't have that same explosiveness and also was a little bit more conservative on his knees as he got older. Like you didn't really see him dunk once he
Hardly.
tore yeah, once he tore his ACL, it was never the same. We've seen other players like Westbrook still had that athleticism afterwards, and just some guys, and with time, with medicine, technology has just gotten better, and rehab processes have improved. So some guys are still able to have that athleticism even after it. But just for Derrick Rose, I think just at the time when he did it, unfortunately, it really just it altered his career and how he played the game. So Nick, I definitely want to see them hang up the number one in the rafters. I think he should have retired as a Bull, personally. I think our front office also is run by a bunch of buffoons, but
He should have been a Bull for
that's yeah. I don't like that. If you look at that trade again, Jerry Grant, Robin Lopez,
terrible.
and yeah, it wasn't a great trade. I just think that at the time the Bulls were trying to change their identity, go around Jimmy Butler. I think the fans also just kind of pressuring again, like I said, I think a lot of fans are revisionists in this aspect. A lot of people wrote off Derrick Rose. I know that I definitely was one of those people after the 2016 season. I wasn't happy with where we were at. But I even thought that trade for Rose was garbage. I will be one of the first people to say it. I'm
Mhm.
sure I said on my Twitter all those years ago that it was a bad trade. The Bulls got robbed. Uh, so yeah, I mean that's one that I wish that we could have had back. But obviously we can't live in a world of ifs. So have to just kind of acknowledge that this was one of those things that, like the Vooch trade
Yep.
and the DeMar trade, we wish we could take back a little bit of those things.
Yep. I agree.
Nick, to get to the next topic, which I know is going to be the majority of what we wanted to talk about. And
Mhm.
it's funny. At this time last year, on the same date, on September 27th, Damian Lillard got traded to the Bucks, and we went on the next day and talked about the Damian Lillard trade. And here we are again, about a year later. I know a couple days later.
Yeah.
Uh, we're talking about Karl-Anthony Towns getting traded, and he's also getting traded from the West to the East. And he got traded for a lot. I don't have the full package, but it was highlighted with Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo. They have about like
Strong
three or four
pick.
other players, and then they have a first round pick and then two second round picks that they gave in this trade. I believe the first round pick is owned by the Mavericks. So that was the trade package in return for Karl-Anthony Towns and then another player. And I just have to ask you, Nick, do you feel that this moved the needle at all for the Knicks? Or do you feel like it just kind of kept them where they were already at?
That is a very good question because even before this Karl-Anthony Towns trade, I would say um, at best they were the second best team in the East, but third. So I think you could argue them
Hmm.
and Philly. You keep going back and forth on it. But I think with this move, I think it is an upgrade. I think I would say they definitely got better. I
Hmm.
think they're more closer to Philly. They're more closer to Boston than Philadelphia is to Boston, if that makes sense. I think the Knicks match up better with Boston than Philly does. Um, I think it was a good move for both teams, though. I just think like the Rudy go like I just think Anthony Edwards would just pair up better with a guy like Julius Randle. I don't think it was really ever going to work with Karl-Anthony Towns. I don't think they would ever been able to make that next jump to get to the NBA Finals if they kept their roster intact. They saw what the Mavericks did, adding Klay Thompson. They see what other teams in the West were doing. They felt like they needed to make a change. Um, the Knicks, they answered a lot of issues that they had on their team last year. They
Hmm.
didn't have any shooting, hardly any shooting, and they didn't have a big that they could play pick and pop with. You got that with Karl-Anthony Towns now shooting wise, and you can play the pick and pop game with, and he could do the same things as Kristaps Porzingis can. Really, to be honest with you, like I love Mitchell Robinson, great defender, great rebounder and stuff, but like, he's a liability on offense. It's kind of like how Rudy Gobert is with Minnesota. They needed a guy that could really stretch the floor out, create more space for Brunson more. Obviously, they added Mikal Bridges too. The Knicks were busy this offseason. They traded 6 first-round picks just to acquire these two. All I'm going to say is it better work because they gave up a lot. I mean, Dante DiVincenzo was huge for the Knicks last year.
Mm-hmm.
When Brunson was hurt, like even during the playoffs, Dante DiVincenzo was playing well, man, knocking down some threes. He was playing defense. He was guarding one of the best guards on the opposing team. Julius Randle, me and you always talked about you ain't winning shit with Julius Randle.
Nope.
So I would say the Knicks won this trade, I would say. But I understand why Minnesota did it at the same time.
Yeah, I think that both sides can argue that they won this trade. I know that for Karl-Anthony Towns and the contract situation, there were reports after the trade came out that Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker wouldn't have been able to have been retained in free agency just because of what Karl-Anthony Towns is making, plus the salary cap situation. So it was kind of a twofold for them. Do we want to continue to run this core of Ant, Cat, and then Jaden McDaniels, Rudy Gobert, and whatever else we can put around them? Because if you lose Naz Reid, and I personally think that Naz Reid should be one of your closers in this lineup, like you said, Nick, we have harped on this conversation multiple times. We even said in the last episode about worst trades. If you haven't watched it, check it out. Rudy Gobert was overpaid. Rudy Gobert should not have been traded for all of what Minnesota had to give up, which includes Walker Kessler and some other pieces. You and I both know, at least in the regular season, it would be nice to have a guy like Jared Vanderbilt that can also be a good defender for you and defend the best player on the other team. Yep. On top of also having Jaden McDaniels. Those two with Ant, you just have a guy running the point too. Mm-hmm. And then just having maybe somebody like, Naz Reid or switch him out with Walker Kessler. I'm sure like they wish that they didn't make that trade now. And I do think for Cat, I think it's good that he's getting out of Minnesota because the accountability is going to be higher in New York. The media is going to eat him alive if he does not produce, and he's going to really have to answer for everything he does now. Because this is not Minnesota. This is New York. And if you want to be loved in New York, you got to show up.
Especially in big spots and big moments, especially even in big regular season games. Like when you are playing Boston, when you are playing Philly, when you are playing, rivals and stuff like that, when you are playing against good teams. Yeah, I totally agree with you, man. And I think the Knicks made this move because I think this is something that Tom Thibodeau was really pulling for. I think he wanted the big that could shoot the three. I think he wants to play 5 out more, wants to give Brunson more space to work with, wants to give Mikal Bridges more space to work with. And Karl-Anthony Towns had a good relationship with Thibodeau. Like Karl-Anthony Towns had Thibodeau's back with the whole Jimmy Butler shit was going down. You know what I mean? Thibodeau always and Cal always had a good relationship. I think that has something to do with it as well. There's definitely a connection there. Like I said before, when they traded for Mikal Bridges, when we had your 2 friends on with the Celtics episode, the Knicks are doing everything they possibly can to match up with the Boston Celtics. This is just another stepping stone to be able to match up. Because if you look at their starting 5 on paper, you got Jalen Brunson. You're going to have, Josh Hart. You have OG Anunoby. You're going to have, I'm blanking on, who am I blanking on? Obviously, Cat will be at the 5. You have, I'm blanking out. Why am I blanking on a name right now?
So Jalen Brown, Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges,
Bridges. That's what I'm
and then Karl-Anthony Towns. You'd have those 5 as you're probably your closing lineup.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they lost some depth, especially to their bench for making those moves. But Trey McBride had a pretty solid year last year for the Knicks. He's giving you a huge piece off the bench. They still have Achua coming off the bench as well. Yep. Mitchell Robinson's going to come off the bench. I wonder if they're going to move him though.
Mitchell Robinson?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. I when this trade went down, I didn't love it for the Knicks at first.
Yeah.
And it was more because I always think about two things with Karl-Anthony Towns that I don't think he has ever been great at. One is being a defensive player. He did do well against cannot talk. Nikola Jokic last year in the playoffs
Mhm.
when they were playing the big man stoppers here, using something out of the Lakers playbook from the 2020 season of just throwing bodies at Jokic and slowing him down.
Yeah.
I think Karl-Anthony Towns showed that he can play some defense. I am just worried that I think in a series against the Sixers, he's going to
Mhm.
get exposed. That's my one fear is like, what happens if they play the Sixers? What happens if they play the Heat? Because Miami has had the Knicks number for a long time. And Bam, I'm not saying that Bam's going to destroy Karl-Anthony Towns. Like, it's not going to be like that. I'm just worried that can Karl-Anthony Towns stay on the floor, not get into foul trouble, because that was something that he was having a problem with in the Mavs series,
Yeah.
staying out of foul trouble sometimes. And also, can he produce the same way he does in the season? Like in the season, his numbers are great. I mean, he's had seasons where he's averaged 27 points. He's shooting 40% from three almost every year. He's a good rebounder. He can do all the intangible things like on the offensive end. My worry has
Super
always been
smart.
his defense. And in a system with Tom Thibodeau, can you at least play average to a little bit above average defense, especially when the playoffs come around? Because in the regular season, I think the Knicks could be the second seed again. I think that they're that good. I do think that Dante DiVincenzo apparently said that he wasn't really happy about the Nova reunion as everybody, you know, said it was going to be is great thing. The Nova Knicks, let's go. He wasn't thrilled about it. I think that Minnesota got a good amount out of this
I
trade.
agree.
I think that Dante DiVincenzo in a lineup with Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards and Naz Reid is going to be great for them. You got a shooter now. And I think that's something that the Wolves just didn't have at times because you're relying off Mike Conley, who's 37 years old, to be one of your better shooters. And Karl-Anthony Towns, while yes, he is a good shooter, when it comes to the playoffs, it always seems like he becomes a pumpkin and only averages. I mean, I'll throw out some numbers here right now. In the Denver series where they said he was great, right? And we talked about this when we were talking about the playoffs. I said in order for the Wolves to win and make it to the NBA Finals, Karl-Anthony Towns has to go for at least 20 to 25 points a game in order for them to win because you can't have Ant scoring 30 and expecting them just to win just based on Ant's 30.
Yeah.
And in a lot of those games in the series, yeah, he got to 20 to 27 points, 23 points, 23 points. But there were some games where he didn't have great games like 14 points, 13, 10. You, in a series against the Celtics who you have four or five guys that can cook you, you need Cat to show up because Jalen Brunson is really the only guy on the Knicks that has been a consistent scorer in the playoffs for them. Josh Hart is a role player. He's going to play every minute, not going to be the guy that's going to give you points. Can OG Anunoby stay healthy this year? I think if he can, again, not a scorer, but a guy that could give you 15, 17 points, play really good defense for you. Mikal Bridges is going to have to be that number two guy. I think if Cat's not showing up, but Cat needs to be the number two in most situations, and then Mikal Bridges should be the three. Kind of like what he was in Phoenix when he was really that like third option for them, especially
Yeah.
the 2 years that they were really good.
Mhm.
That's what he needs to be. But Nick, before we go to break real quick,
Yep.
I just have to ask, do you feel like you would rather start a lineup with Julius Randle and Naz Reid, or would you rather have Naz Reid playing with Rudy Gobert?
I go Julius and Nas.
I would too.
Yeah.
I just had to ask it.
Yeah.
And
They can't afford to really do that though because they pay Rudy Gobert a whole chunk, like a shit ton of money, and they traded so much for him, so they had no choice but to play him. And obviously, I'm sure they've been trying to get rid of him somehow, but no one's biting on that, obviously. But it's gonna be interesting to see the pairing with Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards. I know we'll talk more about that when we get back from break, but
Yeah. So, guys, hang on. We'll be back. Talk a little bit more about the Knicks Wolves trade, and we'll talk a little bit about what this could mean for next year for both of them. So, welcome back to the second part of the episode. Nick, right before we went to break, we were just talking about who would you rather start, and you said Julius Randle and Naz Reid. But you also did mention about Rudy Gobert's getting way too much money. So you know that in likely reality, it's going to probably be Rudy. I think Julius Randle will be the starting four.
yeah.
I'm curious to see how this team will be. I actually feel that while it's good that Cat moved on, I just don't know how Julius Randle is going to play on the Timberwolves just because he lives in the mid-range, back to the basket, ISO player that wants to score, and nothing against that. I mean, he's had great years on the Knicks. I'm just a little worried, like, how is that going to look when the playoffs come? And who's going to be benched? Because Randall's not a three-point shooter, and neither is Rudy Gobert. Your only big that can really stretch the floor is Naz Reid. And I'm a little worried on that end for them. So how do you feel about this new construction of the Wolves? Where do they go? Do they need to make another trade? Because I think that's a question that we all need to ask because Ant Edwards is ahead of schedule of where they thought he was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think trade Rudy Gobert, trade somebody else, see if you can find somebody? I mean, do you possibly, I don't know, go into the venture of bringing back a guy like Zach LaVine, who is not really wanted on the Chicago Bulls? Well, they say that he is, but do you bring a guy in like that because you need more scoring, but also shooting?
Yeah.
That was the first name I thought of off top of my head, but what do you think?
You want me to be honest with you?
Yeah.
I would trade Julius Randle and flip him for other pieces that would fit. I think if you could flip them for certain pieces, I think it would mesh better with this current roster. I think they have no one's biting on Rudy Gobert. They're stuck with them. There's certain players that are just stuck in situations, and this is just one of those instances. I just think Julius Randle, like Rudy Gobert's gonna clog the lane because he ain't gonna stand on the perimeter.
No.
Especially when Julius Randle's trying to operate. Like Rudy Gobert is literally gonna be trying to set some screens, stuff like that. And I think he's just gonna clog the lane for Julius Randle. Or it can mean that Julius Randle is going to shoot more threes when he's not really a 3-point threat. I mean, he's capable of knocking down threes. Like he can knock down a three. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he's not like a Naz Reid. He ain't shooting no 40% from three. I'll tell you that right now. And Anthony Edwards is not going to put up with Julius Randle. He's one of those players that has a horrible shot selection. And I don't know how Anthony Edwards is gonna deal with it. I think Karl-Anthony Towns at least knew his role on this team. I just don't know if Julius Randle is gonna handle not having the ball in his hands a whole lot, especially when he has an opportunity. Like I feel like a lot of his points now is going to have to come in that mid-range area. He's not going to really get to be in the paint as much, especially when he's going to be on the floor with Rudy Gobert. I think he could really do Julius Randle things when Rudy Gobert is off the floor and Naz Reid is in the game with them.
Yeah. I think that's the lineup I'd rather see.
I feel like what's going to happen is they're going to start Randle at the 4 and then Gobert's going to start at the 5. Mm-hmm. But I think they're going to take Randle out first with the starters, and he's going to be the leader of the second unit where he's going to cook. I think it's going to be one of those things. It's kind of like when Brooklyn, when they had obviously Kyrie, KD, Harden, who was leaving the game first. James Harden led the second unit. I think it's going to be something like that where Julius Randle's going to leave the game early in the first quarter, but start the second quarter. Is going to lead the second unit with him and Naz Reid together on the floor when Anthony Edwards is off the floor.
I could see that. I think that, like you said, the horrible shot selection has been something that Julius Randle's gotten criticized for. There's a reason why they said that he could not be the number one option and win playoff games in New York, just because you're not going to win backing your way down to the basket every time you go down the court trying to take an 18-foot jump shot. I also think too, the other thing is that the Wolves have still not addressed who's going to be their point guard of the future because Mike Conley is getting older by the minute.
Yep.
You don't really have anybody there that can facilitate outside of Anthony Edwards. I think that's one thing that we've kind of ignored with them too. They've had this cycling rotation of bigs throughout the years. I think bringing in Rudy Gobert, like we've talked about, I feel like, again, this is a topic we talk so much about, and I don't want to just shine everything about Rudy Gobert. In this situation, Rudy Gobert should be the guy that's going to get benched at some point. I know what you're saying, Nick, about the money. Reality of the situation is if you want to win basketball games in April and May and June, you're going to have to kind of put him out of the rotation. He just is going to be a clogging lane stuffer. Julius Randle and him cannot play at the same time because you basically have two guys that cannot shoot
Yep.
outside of a certain perimeter. And I mean, Randall's offensive game is by far in leaps and bounds better than Rudy
Yep.
Gobert. Like he actually knows how to post up, has post moves, has a little fadeaway. It just to me feels like that trade was more to save cap space so they could keep Naz Reid, not necessarily thinking about what this is going to look like on the court with all
Yeah.
of these guys together. I think more they did it to also get another shooter like DiVincenzo. I know
Yep.
that we're going to talk about Randall because the contracts match up better, but
Mhm.
Dante DiVincenzo was the second best player. That was something I wanted to say in the first part of the episode. You were talking about how Dante DiVincenzo was doing good for the Knicks in the playoffs. I would argue he was the second best player on the Knicks in the playoffs. I mean, that one game against Philadelphia where he hit that three to win
Mhm.
it, like that was something that they just didn't have the year
Mhm.
prior, and they got that with him. And I
Yep.
think he's going to be a good piece who can play really solid perimeter defense. I don't think he's as good as he was before the injury in terms of his defense. I think he's still good,
Yeah.
but he was like like one of the Bucks' best perimeter defenders. And I would love to see him in the closing unit with Naz Reid and Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels. I just want to know who's the fifth guy you're putting out there because right now I don't feel like they know who that's going to be.
Yeah.
And I don't know, can you put Julius Randle out there?
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting. Like, would they want Anthony Edwards to just run the point and have both
Mm-hmm.
Dante and Jaden McDaniels in the lineup with Randall and Naz Reid? I think you could see something like that. I think you could see Anthony Edwards, Jane Daniels. You got Dante DiVincenzo. You have Julius Randall and Naz Reid. That could be the five. But I think what's gonna happen, I think like the first 20-some games into the
Mm-hmm.
season, they're gonna realize that this pairing is just not working. And I think Julius Randle's gonna wanna. I think Julius Randle is not gonna last the season with Minnesota.
It's possible. I mean, if they've been able to have Rudy Gobert for 2 years, man, I think they can make it work with Julius. I
Yeah.
just think that he's just going to have to play a more diminished role this
Mhm.
year. I know that sounds crazy to say that, considering that he's on
Better on
paper
game.
the
Right.
second best player on their team. I just think that he's not going to get the same opportunities maybe
Mhm.
in certain moments
Yep.
that he was able to get in New York, but we'll see. We could be totally off about this, and he ends up having a great year in Minnesota, and we
Yeah.
don't know what we were talking about. I think
I
though,
think statistically he's always gonna be fine.
yeah,
I just think like we're more bringing up the pairing.
I agree. I don't like the pairing.
Pairing. Yeah.
I don't think it makes sense because their games are very opposite of each other.
Yeah.
And again, you already have one lane stuffer, you're bringing in a second one.
Yeah.
And like you said, you don't want him to resort to being a guy that sits on the perimeter trying to shoot corner threes because look, some bigs can do that and they're fine with it, but he's not Chris Bosh. He is not Kevin Love.
Mhm.
That's not his game.
Yeah,
I wouldn't try to force him to start doing that because it's gonna shake his confidence. I don't love it. Ant
yeah,
is your best player. So you know that he's gonna always have the ball in his hand with the game on the line.
yeah,
And you've already seen the memes all over about Carl, like yeah, not Karl-Anthony Towns. I was gonna say Karl-Anthony Towns. You've been seeing the Julius Randle like waving off Anthony Edwards, like, no, I got this.
mhm.
Okay, we'll see. I
Yeah,
I I don't know. I actually think though, Nick, for the Knicks, I actually think getting rid of DiVincenzo, like thinking about it more now, as much as it would have been nice to see him coming off the bench as like in your second unit,
mhm.
you have a like I've kind of overlooked that they had OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, and it's kind of like even if you trade DiVincenzo, you didn't lose as much as you think because Mikal Bridges is a pretty solid 3-point shooter and he's a really good perimeter defender, and you still have Josh Hart and you still have OG Anunoby. So I think they're going to be really thin in terms of their bench, like you mentioned earlier. I
Yeah,
think that the trade definitely has put them in a more you guys got to stay as healthy as possible. And under Coach Thibs, that's pretty hard to do
hard.
considering
Yeah,
how much he likes to play his guys. But
mhm.
reality says Tibbs usually plays guy like a 7-8 man roster even during the regular season. He's putting minutes on all his guys. You're probably going to see Cat a lot at the 5 this year. Mitchell Robinson never can stay healthy. One thing that I do want to mention with that too is that I actually think that they're going to probably try to see how Cap plays at the 4 to begin the year and have Mitch start. And then I think I'm not saying he's going to play 30 minutes, probably more like he plays 20 minutes, like 20,
Yeah,
25 minutes, but Cat's going to play majority of the 5 minutes, kind of like what they would do with 80 to begin the year, where they were kind of having him play the 4 still because he didn't want to play the 5. But then over time, he just ended up becoming the 5, even though they had a center starting with him and then coming off the floor, then 80 was just the 5. I think it's going
yeah,
to be a situation like that, like where he's not going to start at the 5, but he's going to play the 5 the majority of the game. I think that's what they're going to do. I think until you can find somebody to possibly get at the trade deadline or maybe somebody in the offseason next year to replace Mitchell Robinson, because yeah, he can't do anything on the offensive end. He's this not Rudy Gobert, but he just has no offensive game at all. Do you think that the Knicks can challenge the Celtics? Because again, I still will have the Celtics as my favorite this year. I don't think that they're going anywhere as long as they can stay healthy. I know Chris Kristaps is going to be out for the first half of the year, but I think as long as they can stay healthy, that team is as good as advertised. They proved it. They're hungry, man. They have not made it about this championship at all. They came in to media day, made it about business. How are you feeling about the Knicks playoff wise? Because I already harped about Cat's playoff numbers. I want to hear you. What do you think?
man, it's so tough because the Knicks like they have insane firepower now. They got the firepower to match up. I just question their bench. They're very, very thin. I feel like if guys start getting hurt, especially in the tips coaching style of things, it could really like go downhill for the Knicks. It's I think even before this cat, even with cat now, even before this trip, I felt like the Knicks were a top 3 team in the East, anyways. I don't think it puts them over the top. I think, just like you said, Boston's still the team to beat, and I think as long as Kristaps Porzingis is healthy for the Boston Celtics, they're going to the NBA Finals.
Oh yeah,
No
yeah.
one's beating them in a 7-game series, especially when you got Derrick White, Drew Holiday. Like, yeah, I think the Knicks defensively is probably the best team in the Eastern Conference that could defend the Boston Celtics
Mhm.
because I think they match up. Here, this is what's interesting to me. It goes by matchups, and I feel like the Knicks can match up with Boston better than any other team in the East. But just like you said, If it ends up being Knicks versus Philly in a conference semifinals matchup and Joel Embiid is healthy, I got to be honest with you. I'm picking Philadelphia to win the series. I
Yeah.
think Cat is going to get cooked by Embiid. I think if Paul George could find his rhythm with this team, be a third option, score 20 points, this ain't no Tobias Harris. This is Paul George now. And Tyrese Maxey, he's a rising star. He's a star, man. He's really, really good. And I think Daryl Morey's not going to be done. I think even at the trade deadline, he's a general manager that's always looking to improve their roster. I think the Knicks now trading 6 first-round picks, they really don't have much to trade now. This
Yeah.
is to be their team.
Yeah.
They got to live and die with it. I think Philly still has room to improve this roster. I think Daryl Morey's going to do that. I would give Philly the nod over the Knicks still. So I had the Knicks as the third best team in the Eastern Conference.
To piggyback off of what you just said too, I definitely think that Philadelphia was the first team that came to mind for me of mismatch for the Knicks,
Yep.
especially this rendition of the Knicks. And not because they're not going to have guys that can defend Tyrese Maxey and Paul George, because they have enough guys that can do that.
Yeah.
But not only do they have to worry about Joel Embiid, Andre Drummond is the backup center for the Sixers this year. So he's going to be causing problems on the offensive glass. So even if Embiid's out of the game, you're going to still have to box out Andre Drummond a lot because he's one of the best offensive rebounders in the league. And I also think that because the Knicks are so thin already, this is the same problem that we've seen with some teams that try to go all in and they trade a lot of their depth away. If any of those guys get hurt, and I mean OG Anunoby or Mikal Bridges, which I don't think Mikal will get hurt, knock on wood, because he stayed
definitely has
healthy.
a history of it.
OG's had a really bad history of it, and that was also what hampered them in that Pacers series last year. Because without OG, they were not the same team defensively. And I know that you got Mikal Bridges, but you don't have Dante this year. So remember that. You don't got Dante DiVincenzo this year. Josh Hart was playing 48 minutes a game.
Yeah.
And I think the Sixers got better roster-wise this offseason. So in a 7-game series, Cat's going to get into foul trouble because that was a huge reason in the Mavs series. If you remember that Cat got into some foul trouble in some of those games, what happens if this goes down in Philadelphia? I mean, you get 3 fouls in the first half. Now you're missing your second best player. So where's the scoring going to come from? I know they beat Philadelphia last year.
Yeah.
But like you said, Paul George is not Tobias Harris. I don't care how bad Paul George has been in some playoff series. If he can just be average and score 22 points, you're already doing better than Tobias Harris did his whole career in Philadelphia. And there's nothing you can say that doesn't make that true. So
no, I completely agree with everything you just said. And Mitchell Robinson can't stay healthy. He has a history of not being healthy either. So like I think
Isaiah Hartenstein was a huge hit to
like
them.
if they lose him, even especially during the regular season, like they're gonna be playing a lot of small ball.
Yeah, because they're gonna have to play Precious then, and Precious is an undersized big, so you're gonna have a lot of issues when it comes to those kind of matchups. I think because a lot of the league isn't big in the sense of that, you won't have that problem all the time. But even a team like Cleveland, they got Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. Now, Jarrett Allen's not Joel Embiid by any means, but I would be a little concerned about certain matchups just because of your thin front court.
Yeah.
Even a team like Orlando, man, they're big. They're a big team, can bully you in that sense. Not to say that I think that the Knicks could beat them in the series because just offensively, they're a better team than Orlando. But Orlando could cause them problems, I think, in that matchup just because you don't have the size advantage that you'd like.
Yeah.
Especially with Karl-Anthony Towns being one of your bigs and just him having a history of not being a defensive player. And even under Tibbs, I mean, yeah, he was average, but I mean, he wasn't like on the off defensive team or anything. So I want to see the cat that was playing against Denver. If he can be that guy, anything's possible.
Yeah, I hear you. And I would say with like Karl-Anthony Towns, like, yeah, they really needed a pick and pop guy. I understand that, especially with Brunson and Mikal Bridges. There's gonna be a lot of pick and pops with Cat.
Mhm.
I just hope he doesn't fall in love with the three too much. He's
Mhm.
so skilled, he's so talented. Like he could back people down. Like he even like
He needs to drive in a lot.
really he can even drive to the basket like off the dribble.
Mhm.
Like he's got the ball handling skills of a big to do so many different things. I get it. Like I think he's like 39% from three in his entire career. He's one of the best big 3-point shooters, probably the game has ever seen, to be honest with you. I'll give him credit what credit's due from there. But I just hope he doesn't fall in love with the three like he did in the Western Conference Finals. And he struggled in a lot of those games because he kept jacking up 8+ threes and he just wasn't knocking them down. I think going into what was it, game 4, he was shooting like 13% from three in the series, and he had a really, really good game 4. That's why they didn't get swept, especially in the fourth.
Correct.
Knocked down some big threes in that
Yeah.
fourth quarter of that game. That's why they didn't get swept. That was the game, especially Anthony Edwards didn't play well in that game. So Karl-Anthony
Yep.
Towns stepped up. So there's going to be games, especially in the postseason. Teams are going to be keying in on Brunson. They're going to be doubling him every time he gets the ball.
Mhm.
And Cat just has to step up. Especially there's going to be some games where Brunson or Mikal Bridges might not be having it. Cat has to be the guy at some point during
Yeah.
the season as well. So, and he's talented enough for it. So, but it's going to be very interesting to see how he meshes with the Knicks because there's a lot of talent on this team and there's only one basketball.
And that's the thing too. I don't think that is going to necessarily be the reason why this team doesn't work. Because again, a lot of those guys are selfless players. They're not Julius Randle type players that need the ball in their hand. A lot of
Yeah.
those guys play off ball. Karl-Anthony Towns is going to have to be more aggressive, like you said, when Jalen Brunson's not feeling it, when Mikal Bridges isn't putting up the numbers that we know he can. Can Karl-Anthony Towns shoot 69% like he did in game 4 of the Mavs? I don't think he's going to do that every game, but can he at least hit a couple threes? I think also just being able to drive the basket in. He can handle it like a guard, but he's big. He needs to use that body because I did see him in moments. And I'm going to, again, go back to the Denver series. That's the most confident I've seen Cat play in a playoff series.
Yeah.
Because even in the first round, I didn't really feel like Cat did a crazy amount. Like the stat line would tell you one thing, but if you watch the game, I didn't see a guy that was instilling fear. And I'm not like a lot of guys do that anymore, but he just didn't look like a guy that was making this huge impact. Like his impact on the floor did not get felt the way it looked on the stat sheet on some of those games. So I have to say, it was really Ant just being a villain, a
Yep.
bully to the Phoenix Suns and just sweeping those boys off into the desert, tumbleweeds going somewhere. So
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I'd say, I just hope this pairing doesn't bite them in the ass like it did to the Bulls. When they put DeMar, Levine, and Vooch together, Vooch fell in love with the three, kept jacking up threes.
Yeah.
Never really got going in a lot of games because like when you're starting the game just jacking up threes, you saw he missed a lot of teardrop
100%.
with the Bulls. And
Yeah.
I just hope that doesn't happen with the Knicks. And I hope Cat can accept any role that is best for the team and not specifically best for him. I think that's also why they got rid of Julius Randle, because Julius Randle would have been pissed off not having the ball a lot in his hands. He would have been frustrated with his role, and Tibbs would not have it. Believe me, he doesn't mesh with players like that. You know what I mean? So he meshes with Cat, and hopefully Cat can, obviously he's gonna still have to shoot the ball well from the perimeter, but also he's gonna have to, attack. You know what I mean? Especially if they do double Brunson a lot in these pick and rolls and the guy, rotates over to take away the three from Cat. Take advantage of the mismatches that you get, because a lot of NBA teams, they're switching every pick and roll now. And this is something like with the Bulls. I hate talking about the Bulls, but they never took advantage of the mismatches Vooch was getting. I hope the Knicks at least take advantage of the mismatches that Cat will get, because he could get so many baskets underneath, the basket, because obviously he's going to have a lot of guards guarding them in the paint. Especially they're going to be switching everything, because they don't want Cat to get a wide open three, and they don't want Brunson to just cook.
You couldn't be more right on that, Nick. I think that one thing that the Bulls, like we talk about a lot with Vooch, is that yeah, over time that pick and pop three where he was shooting at the top of the key off of a good roll. It just wasn't working at the end, especially that last year. You really saw that fall off. And I do think that Cat does fall in love with the three a little too much. So we do need to see him roll a little bit more than pop in certain matchups too. I think though we'll have to see how this team looks, because we haven't even gotten into the preseason yet. Not to say that that is going to be the indicator for what we're about to expect, but we need to see about, I would say, give it about 10 to 15 games. Let's see how this team looks. We'll come back to this conversation when that does happen.
Yep.
But for right now, I think the biggest things that we've seen in this episode that we've gotten takeaways from is, will Karl-Anthony Towns be aggressive? Will he not fall in love with the three? Can the Knicks do enough to make it to the conference finals this year without having to go through a matchup like Philadelphia? And how will the Wolves look, especially post Karl-Anthony Towns with Julius Randle as your four? And what's it going to look like at the five? Are we going to see more Naz Reid? Are we going to see Rudy Gobert still playing about 30 minutes a game? And with Dante DiVincenzo, what will his impact be on this team? How much are they going to utilize him? And which team likely is going to make another move? Because I think if we just look at what assets are left, Minnesota is going to be likely the team that's going to make a trade, because they were just 3 games away from making the finals. And Anthony Edwards is just going to continue to get better.
Yep. I agree. I got one question for you.
Yeah, what's up?
Going into the season, as of right now, presently constructed,
Mm-hmm.
who do you think is going to go further in the playoffs, Minnesota or New York?
I'm going to have to go with the Knicks right now. I know when we talked about this, I actually did say last episode about Minnesota going far, like that they could make it back to the conference finals, maybe in the NBA finals. I didn't expect Cat to get traded. That was the thing I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
I thought that they were good enough last year to make it there. I just think now with Julius Randle as your four, I don't know what that team is going to look like on the offensive end in the playoffs. Do they have enough shooting?
Yeah.
And do they have enough spacing? And at the end of the games, who's going to be your closing lineup?
Yeah.
I think the Knicks, if Cat can just be an average to above average defender, he's going to give you hopefully 20 to 22 points in the playoffs. He's going to give you a couple threes. Pick and pop game is going to be good with Jalen Brunson. I think he just needs to play aggressive down low, because look, you're going to get the whistle every time. You're going to get the whistle when you're driving in and you want to be able to, put your mark on the game. Let me ask you that same question. Currently constructed, which team do you think is better, and which one do you think is going to make it further?
I would say the Knicks. What's very interesting? This is so interesting to me, because I feel like Minnesota's had the pieces. We're going into this offseason, like they didn't make many moves, but they're staying intact. They're very confident in this team moving forward. And like they were so close to making the finals. And all of a sudden, Shams bomb.
Yeah, no Woj bombs anymore, man. That man retired.
Now it's even being reported that Karl-Anthony Towns didn't even request a trade. So the fact that they just got rid of him, it is very interesting that a team like Minnesota, especially coming off the year that they had last year, they're looking more towards the future for moving Cat because of his contract versus just going all in, which is very interesting to me, because I feel like a lot of teams would have stayed intact. They won't worry about the future. They were 3 games away from the finals last year. They run the shit back. It is very interesting. So I feel my question is, Do you believe something must have happened with maybe Anthony Edwards or Karl-Anthony Towns behind the scenes that nobody knows about, or maybe the front office and Cat that nobody knows about? Maybe they try to get Karl-Anthony Towns to restructure his contract and he refused. Maybe that's why this might have happened. But it's just crazy to me how all of a sudden just randomly this just happens with the team that a lot of people can see going into the season. Timberwolves making the finals with the same team intact. Like they look to the future more than focusing on what they have right now and how they have a damn good team, and they can definitely make the NBA Finals.
So to answer that hypothetical question that you just put, I do think that there must have been some preliminary conversation about a contract extension and possible reduction of salary. And I mean, maybe the front office just said, "Hey, look, Carl's going into a contract year. We need to re-sign Naz Reid. We want to keep him. We want to keep some of these other guys that we have on the team, and we're not going to be able to sign all of them and keep them all happy. What's going to give us the best opportunity to continue to win moving forward?" And I think that the team just thought, okay, if we trade Cat, we can get some value back, maybe get some pieces that we can move around. I don't know if there was like an Ant Cat like just didn't get along anymore. I
Yeah.
don't think the Ant went to the front office and said, "Hey, you need to trade Cat."
Mm-hmm.
I think it was more contract. I think it was money because that was what the report says. I'm going to trust that's what it was because it just didn't seem like they were upset. I mean, they did better than what was expected of them that year. Nobody was saying Minnesota's going to make the Western Conference Finals. They're ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Now, before we end this podcast, I got to ask you one question.
All
If
right.
Minnesota plays awful this year, are they blowing it up and starting to just try to find new pieces to surround Anthony Edwards with? Besides keeping Naz Reid, I'm not saying that they're going to trade him.
Mhm.
Keeping Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels. So those three, Ant, Jaden, Naz Reid. Everybody else, do you think it would be like a fire sale type of situation where they're going to just try and get assets and then look for free agents to sign and get rid of Rudy Gobert, get rid of, Julius Randle? What do you think? Because I want to hear this. I'm really curious to hear what your answer is about that.
Yeah. Wow, that's a very, very good question. Let me put it this way. I think Minnesota got worse with this trade a little bit. I think they would have been better going into the season, staying intact with Cat. But I will say I don't think it's gonna be such a huge drop off with Minnesota. I think Minnesota should be a top 5 seed in the West. I don't think they'll be a play-in team or anything like that. I think Anthony Edwards is going to be playing at a high MVP level, player. Mike Conley fits well with him. Jaden McDaniels, Donte DiVincenzo, Naz Reid, those guys are really, really good. Minnesota is they still got some good solid bench players too as well on this team. It's just very interesting to see how Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert get a pair together. I just don't think the pairings going to work. And I think Minnesota, I would say they trade Julius Randle. I don't think they could trade Rudy Gobert. No one's going to want it. No one's going to want that contract. No one's going to want to deal with a guy in today's NBA that has no offensive game whatsoever. Nobody wants to deal with it, especially in the playoffs. Game slows down more. You see pick and rolls, teams switch everything. They don't want to deal with having Rudy Gobert have to guard somebody on an island. No teams don't want to deal with that. And I think Minnesota would trade Julius Randle and just get what you can from him. They're hoping Julius Randle's going to have a good season. Now, I don't think Minnesota's going to make the conference finals as presently constructed. I think they're going to have to move some pieces around for sure. But I still think they're a top 5 seed in the West. I still think they're going to win a lot of regular season games. I could still see this team winning 50-plus games in the regular season.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. I respect the answer. I think that I do think it's going to probably I don't think they're going to get that bad. I'm just kind of curious to see if they can't live up to expectations of what they've put themselves in.
Yeah.
Does the front office panic a little bit? Because we've seen that happen before. I'm just curious to see what that is going to be. But we'll talk about that more, Nick, in a future episode. Because, guys, we always appreciate you listening, giving us your insights of what we can always do better. So I just want to say again, please share, like, comment, and subscribe to the podcast. Nick, any last words that you want to say before we sign off for the night?
I got one prediction.
Okay.
Uh, the Oklahoma City Thunder is going to win the NBA championship this year.
Bro, I'm gonna need to put that OKC sign up there very soon, bro. I gotta still do the Boston one too. So it looks like we might be having to put that up there, man. I
I'm trusting my guy Shea. I think he's gonna have another incredible season. I think the pieces that Oklahoma was able to add, Alex Cruz was gonna fit well with this team defensively.
100%.
I think on paper they got the best defensive lineup in basketball. If you really look at it on paper, I think getting the big from the Knicks, they might have overpaid, but it's something that they desperately needed to this team. I think Chet Holmgren, Jan Williams, those guys are going to take another step forward. Isaiah Joe, like they got a lot of guys on this team, and they know who the leader is. They know who to get the ball to late in games. I feel like this everybody knows their roles. Like Alex Cruz has been on multiple teams. Like he knows his role in he knows what he needs to do. I just love what Sam Presti's doing. And dude, he still has 16, 17 first round draft picks. Even if he wants to get aggressive and at the trade deadline, he will do that. I think he knows that he's got the team to do it. I think they still need a piece. I think Sam Presti's going to make a move. I just don't see Kristaps Porzingis being healthy again. I think that's what it's going to come down to for Boston. I still think Boston can still make the finals, but I think if Oklahoma makes another move or two, I think they can beat Boston in the 7-game series. I truly believe it.
All right. Well, we're gonna remember that at the end of the season, Nick. We've had some pretty good predictions in the past, so I'm hoping that that one ends up being true too, man. I'd love to see OKC win their first championship, SGA, giving a title to the city, Alex Caruso being a two-time NBA champion, hopefully, and we'll see what happens, guys. NBA season's back, which means more content's going to be coming. We are hyped. October 22nd couldn't come soon enough.
Yeah,
I'm ready to talk some hoops, Nick. Talk some trash in fantasy this year.
absolutely, man.
Wishing you best of luck. Don't get pick number 10 again, but we'll see. We'll see.
I hear you on that, dude.
But for me and Nick, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate the support and have a good night.